Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at, first I'm going to open a motif and we're going to tear it apart. We're going to open one of the motifs that's already in the program so you can kind of see what it does. And because when you want to use a motif or when you want to make your own motif, it's always a good idea to know how to control your jump stitches. So, you know what, I still have not gotten overly used to these new icons. So, okay, here's the gallery, and I'm going to pick one that has some satin stitching to it. And if I'm not sure, I can always click on this preview here. And, so this one has some satin stitching to it. And I'm going to go ahead and select that and just say okay. And I'm going to put just one motif in here. So I just, left click to place it and press escape. And I'm going to go ahead and enlarge this. Okay, so it makes it a little bit easier to see what's going on. Okay, I'm in 3D view, and 3D view never shows any jumps, but you can see we've got a little problem there, right? If I go out of 3D view, you can see I've got some jumps. There's a jump from the center. That's not a big deal. And this one's actually pretty good compared to some of them. But, here's my end point. Here's my starting point. See that little circle right there? So, they've made this so that it'll at least line up a little bit better. But let me zoom in here. Okay, we still have like this little funny line right here. And, when you really get close to it, you look at it and you think, oh, he gads, right? Well, the reason is, if we look at the resequence, and we go to objects, see all these bits, parts, and pieces?
Yep.
This is a pretty complicated little motif. And sometimes when you use the motifs, you'll notice you do have jump stitches in places. And the reason is really because, they didn't or couldn't or didn't want to take the time to make sure that it didn't have these jumps. So in order to edit all of these pieces, you can see when I click on it, everything highlights, right?
Yeah.
It's because they're automatically grouped. So we're going to come up to Edit and Ungroup. We're going to start taking a look at these pieces. This is the first piece right there. And, if I look at what it's going to stitch, it's a triple run line. That's what they've made that. So, that's not too bad, right? Here's the next one. And, this one is going to be a single run line. Okay, it's basically traveling up to here, and there's the stitch length, so you know. And then we've got this little jump up here. And this little jump, doesn't seem to really line up to this. I guess it kind of does. Let's zoom in and look. Okay, see where, here's where my line is right here, right? If I click on the little nodes, I can see, I've got this little jump here and, probably like a little jump from here maybe. But, I've got this little line, this, and then this, okay? I could really get rid of that. I don't really need it. It's kind of a pointless thing. But now I've got this little jump there. See the jump happen?
Yes.
From, this line to this line. And that's an easy fix. I'm just going to select this, go into my little reshape, and see that big square? I'm going to just move it down here. Now you can see what's going to happen. If that line comes up here, it travels here, and then this area fills stitches and it comes right back to here, right? So now if we look, we look at what's going on here, we know what that line is. We know what that is. Then we've got this line back, and this line is the problem. If you look at, the travel back here, it's not matching up, right?
Right.
Well, we can fix that. We can just delete it. And we know this line is a good line. It's doing what we want it to do. We could probably move it and edit it a little bit. So, we'll go ahead and do that first. Let's, kind of zoom in right here. And to do that, I just press the B key, but I can also scroll. Okay, here's my end point on that, and here's my starting point. So I'm going to move that down to there just so it's a little bit neater. See how it kind of matches up a little better with, that line? And let's go back out here. We'll go out at 200. Okay, so here's my resequence, and I'm going to pin that open just so we can keep watching it. Okay, so here's the first one, second one. Then it comes to here, and oh, now we jump back to here. So we've got a problem. So this line I need to duplicate. And this program has this neat little thing that I can use to duplicate this exactly and get the right in and out points, okay? So if I select this line, first thing I'm going to do is change the color, just so I know, it's a different thing right now. I'm going to change something on it. It also, if I go to colors, kind of gives me a marking point of where I'm changing things, right? So I'm changing this, and I select it, and come up here, and there's this little backtrack line. So I'm going to backtrack over that, and here's where the line is, right? I need the line to come down here, so I just left-click and drag it down below there. Okay, so I've got that taken care of, and it's going to have the same attribute as this did, and this was just a single run line. We look at this, single run, right? But I want this one to be a little beefier, so I'm going to come in here and say, make it a triple run line, and I'm going to make sure that it's at the same length as what that original one was, which was 2.5. And if you forget, you can always cancel and say, oop, let's go look again. See, 2.5 millimeters. And so you just put 2.5 and say, okay. So now we've got that changed, right? And we moved it, so it's now going to meet in here, which is really a good thing because the next line is this one. Okay, and this line comes up to here and goes, around here, and, then we have this little line back, and, so we can kind of clean that up a little bit too. So here's this. We're okay on this. There's no jump. Then there's this line. And, that one's not too bad, except this doesn't quite line up the way we want it to. So let me change these back through. Since I corrected them and I'm done with them, it's always a good idea to change them back so that they're done, right? We know that this one's okay, and now we're here, and we know that one's okay. But this one, it's a little interesting, right? So, let's go back and let's look at this one and this line. They don't line up, and, like this one now lines up perfect, right? You can't even tell there's another line there. But this one would show up on my stitching. So I'm going to go ahead and let's zoom back in. And I'm going to just use a little arrow and pull down a little bit because we're looking. See how distinctly separate that is from this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this one's okay. This one and this one are the ones we're going to change. So I'm going to go back and change the color again so I know that, these are the things I want to work on. Okay. This is the line I really want to get rid of because I want this to line up better. So I'm just going to delete it. And, here's my line. I have this jump now. That's what's showing here that looks like a line is actually a jump. So we're going to look at what's going on here. And let's look at what the properties are. It says it's a single run line. Well, okay, but, this actually, maybe we would want it to be a little bit thicker, maybe not. But we can do the same thing because we know it starts here, kind of loops around here and comes back. So, let's just use this backtrack here. See my backtrack and see how that just is right on top of it, right? And I don't really need to make that any heavier because it's, doubling that. And that's not, a stem or anything. So we're going to leave this as is. So I'm going to go ahead and select those two, change them back to red. Now we come down and we go to here. We've got the same problem. We've got this, backtrack that's just really not doing good. It goes all the way back, see? And it doesn't really line up here very well either. And, so it's like this line that's not really very good and this line coming up here. Okay, so, this line is actually pretty good going back. but it doesn't line up. These, this line's better, but it still doesn't line up, right? And then you've got this, of course, that little run line again. So, let's look at correcting this. This line needs to line up in here because this line's not going to backtrack very well. We might be able to hide that a little bit, though. So, okay, so there's this line that's going up to here, and it is a single run. So we're going to leave that alone. This we're just going to get rid of. And then this we're going to select, go into, our reshape or edit, and we're going to move that point over to here. Now I've got, this done, and now this is going to backtrack all the way back, and we're going to look at the properties, and it's going to be a single run, and we're going to say, no, we needed to hide those other two lines, so we're going to make it a triple and make it 2.5, and, it's not lining up very well here. So you've got a couple of things you can do. We can edit, go into the reshape, get that out of the way, and then just kind of drag those nodes over on top of this line a little bit better. Okay, so now that's a little bit better, right? And the same thing down here, just follow it all the way down. I might want to edit this whole thing right here, but I could probably just kind of center that and hide it a little bit because this will be a triple stitch, right? And let me arrow up a little bit. You can see we come all the way down here, so I'm going to go ahead and pull that to match up here. And, that gives us a better overall look. Okay, now, so we've got that all done. So we're now, here and here, it's all done. Now we're to hit this one, and this one's already wrong because you can see it's off. So we're just going to go up to reshape, and, you can pull that out of your way if you want and reshape that into this place. And that's the last line before we get to, this little thing. So let's look at what the stitch settings are. It's a single run. Let's make this a triples as well and keep up with, the rest of them. And then we've got this, and there's no more jumps. So let me zoom all the way out and go into 3D. And I'm going to go ahead and just select everything, go up to edit, and I'm going to group it all back together now, and I can shrink it down to whatever size I want. And we'll make it right about there. Okay, so there's our new motif that, we've got all corrected. It starts here, it ends here. Now, if I tore a motif apart and made changes to it, then, I could also resave the motif and, keep those changes that I made, like the size and, and of course, the changes that I made physically to it. You can see it's a little bit beefier than the original motif. So I suppose I could shrink that down a little bit. But it's going to have a little heavier appearance when it sews, too, because we changed these lines all to triple lines. But the advantage that we have is this. To me, I love this little motif, but, some of these little stitches can get really little in here. You can see, we're able to at least keep the stitches at a normal, even. You can see how they're kind of herky-jerky looking here. Now they're a little more even, and, it's just a little nicer effect, right? Yeah. So let me zoom back out. Do you guys have any questions on what I did before I go on to the next one?
I have a question on the satin stitch part of it. Is that just regular satin stitch, or is that part of those contour stitches that we talked about maybe the first or second lesson?
Yep, these are just regular old satin stitch.
Okay. When you had it in that other mode, it looked like it might be contour, but this looks like it's just regular satin.
Yeah, when I take the little visualizer off, right?
Right.
that's the only time you can see jump stitches. Like when you see something like this jump stitch from here to here,
Yep.
that's from the center out. It's not really there. But, you know, if I had gotten something out of sequence, like, you know, one of these pieces that I didn't move the in and out points, I would be able to see the jump stitches with the visualizer off.
Right.
And that's why it kind of looks like this. It's just, you know, it's just really kind of a cartoony type of view, you know, with just colors representing the stitches versus a little more graphic view.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, so I've made changes to this motif, and, you know, I'm going to select it. I grouped it all together just because it's a good idea to group something together after you know, sequenced it and made changes to it. And, you know, now I want to go to embroidery, and I'm going to make a motif. Now, what this does, I'm going to put it in Bernie's motif, and I'm just going to put edited 1, okay? What this does is, you know, the minute I do that, it's going to ask me a couple of things. One, it's going to ask me to, you know, create the orientation. If I make the orientation from here to here, because I'm going to place 2 points, then that's where it's going to align the motif to. It'll ignore, you know, the in and out points. It doesn't care. It's just going to do what I tell it to do. So I know that my in point's here, my out point is there. When I see that little, you know, double square, that indicates the last stitch. So what I'm going to do is, this also controls your spacing. If I put the first point over here and the first point over here, it's going to space my motifs that far apart, right? So I want to be careful. If you need to, you know, zoom in. And when you place this first point, you know that it starts here, so left click there. And you know that it ends here, so left click right where it ends, right? And it tells me edited 1 has been created. So I say, okay, great. And now let's look and see what edited 1 did. When I go into, you know, the motifs, I can go to Bernie's motif, and here's edited 1 somewhere. I just have to find it. Guess I should make a new file, huh? There it is, edited 1. Okay, so now, see where those 2 little squares are? There's my start point, end point, start point, end point, start point, end point, right? So I will have no jumps there. See, there's no jumps between these, right? But if I had taken this motif and said, okay, make motif, edited 2, and I said, you know, I want it to be here and here, what would happen is this. See where my points are?
Yes.
It'll still try to line these up. I could still technically, you know, try to line these up because I have an outline here. But what it's doing is this. If I'm just clicking away, see how it's spacing them and what it's doing with those? Because of where I put those 2 points when I created the motif. Does that make sense? You guys still there?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I had my mute on. Yes. Yes.
Okay, so does that make sense about controlling when you make the motif, where you place those 2 clicks to create the motif is very important. Yes. Now, this is just selecting the motif and kind of making it. But, you know, if I did something like a fill with that motif, right? Let me make a square real quick. I would have, you know, like this whole different effect. First off, I'd probably end up with jump stitches. Let me get it full size on the screen. And let's select this and go into our, you know, object properties and say, you know, let's make this a motif fill. And, you know, I'm going to select my gallery, right? And let's go down to edited 2. And you can see, you know, the layout, you can see the jumps in it already, right? But see the jump stitches, it's I mean, it's just, blatantly showing the jump stitches between these now because of how I created them. Versus, if I went in and said, let's select edited, oops, let me cancel out of that, edited one, which was laid out, a little more organized. See, there's no jump stitches there.
Much better.
See? Versus the other one, which, because of how it was made, I would have jumps in between every single one of these lines. Like I wouldn't, you can see there's no jumps from, row to row, right? Because it travels. But you can see the jump clearly here to here. So, where you place those 2 points, is going to determine how this spaces and how, how the in and out points are handled basically automatically. So does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Bernie, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
All I'm seeing on the screen is okay, the screen just changed for me. Maybe it's my computer connection, but I just have the solid red square.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a delay because of the internet. Well, here's what I was showing. Remember when we made that motif where we clicked and, we clicked
Yes.
it like at an angle?
Yes.
This is what would happen in a fill.
Right. No, I think I understand where you place your in and out points. That's the spacing of each individual motif that you lay down.
Right. Well, the in and out points, like where you start, even on like a complicated motif like this, and where you end are important.
Yes.
But where you place those 2 clicks when you create the motif is just as important.
Yes.
And that's so, anyway, so there's, that's a very nice motif. It's going to stitch very nicely. I don't have any jumps. I would be not trimming a bunch of little threads out of it. Now, with that being said, some of the motifs that they use in the program have jumps in them. And now you know how to go in and tear them apart to fix them. And
right.
One of them was actually one of my favorites. It's a leaf. And, it just the way it was made, it has jumps in it. But, you could always put a travel stitch in if you needed to. You could do whatever you needed to fix that so that, it didn't have that problem because, it's no fun to trim 8 million stitches out of a line or, a fill like this.
Especially
right,
when you get the needle points down there.
Right. I don't know if I can even find that one. Let me see if I can find it. If it's because it, I thought, oh, what a really cool, fill pattern. Oh, this will look really neat, right? Until I used it, and then I thought, well, it still looked kind of neat, except that I had a lot of stitches to trim, and I was not real happy with it. I don't know if it's that one. I don't think it's that one. They might have removed it and changed it because it was a beautiful stitch, but nope, there it is. And see, it's traveling around, but you can see the jump from here to there, here to there, and it's on every single one of these. So what they did was, the outside outline here starts here, goes around, and ends here, and that's, why it jumps over to the next thing. So you could actually go in there and fix that so that it wouldn't do that to you again, and then resave it so that, you'd have a much better stitch pattern when it was all said and done. And, because, if you had a bigger area, then, you'd be trimming a lot of little jump stitches. So, okay, so that, you guys are good on that? You kind of understand it? Or do you want me to show you? Well,
nope.
You know what? Let's look at that leaf, and I'll show you what's going on with the leaf, because that one is a very interesting little leaf. And it is, I'm sorry?
You still want the lines in the center, right?
You still want the lines in the center. And that's kind of part of the problem is how they made this. It just needed maybe one more step, right? Okay, you see all these little stitches here, right? So I'm going to ungroup. I have to come up here, edit ungroup. Okay, so, you know, here's these little stitches that, you know, that makes up the center right here, okay? And then you've got these little travel stitches here. And then this is all broken up. So this was not made in the program. And ultimately, so maybe you can't fix this. When you see something like this, it means it wasn't, when it breaks up like this, it means it was not particularly made in the program. So it would be a real bear to edit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And, but that doesn't mean that you can't. You know, you come down to here and you go and you look at, you know, this is kind of where your in and out points are. See, there's my in, and there's my, you know, I'd have to zoom in to see the out, but I think it's around in here. There. Okay, so the out point's right there, right? And if you go back up here, my in point, you know, it's not really showing me my in point. It's just because it's not recognizing this as anything.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So what you could do, since it's not recognizing this as anything, but we now know that we were able to move this out point over to here, right?
Mm-hmm.
What you could do is make your own beginning point. Okay, here's this. You could just come over here with a little, you know, single running line and just say, okay, here, 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 here to here. Enter. Change the color so you can find it, because what I can do now is go, oop, pink, move it to the top. Go back to my objects. There's my pink. Bump that line off completely. And I now know where my out point is, and I now know that my in point is right there. See?
Mm-hmm.
They line up now. So then I could take this and say embroidery, make the motif. Let me double check something just to make sure we're not. Yeah, see, there's the jump. There's something wrong with in here. Ah. Okay, so I'm going to take from here to here, and I'm going to change the color because we had that funny jump, right?
Yes.
Which I need to figure out where this is. Okay, so there's this. You know, there's a little run stitch. Okay, there's that. There's the run stitch to those pieces. These are really kind of stupid right here, but I'm going to turn them dark blue so I know where they are for right now, because, okay, there's this. Let me see where that one kind of comes out. It must come out. Must drop down to here to catch those. Okay. So, okay, if we, I don't know why there's that double line in there. Wow, whoever made this really wasn't very logical, but we end up here, and then we have these pieces, right? So I'm not really sure. I think this piece is the problem. I'm going to delete it, and it was. Okay, so that little double thing they had going on in there was the problem. That's why there was that jump stitch. Somebody left something in there they shouldn't have. So All right, so now we've got our repaired leaf, right? We know we start here because there's our circle. We know we end there. So now we can come up here and say, ooh, sweet, I got this fixed because I love this thing. I'm going to make a motif and just say, yay, I finally fixed this thing and I can use it, right? And you're going to leave a little space because, see, that tip comes out a little bit. So we'll go a little bit past, like right to there. Okay, now there's a world of difference in this. Let me zoom out. And, you know, so all I had to do was add like a little tiny thing to it. And now I can control that so much better. It's just going to be, you know, really a fun fill to use now. Oops. The only jump I have is from the center to where it starts. And ta-da, the leaf looks so much better, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, so you can go in and you can even tear apart something that's already done, even if you did it and you notice there's a funny little jump, and, you know, save yourself some frustration and aggravation. Now, one of the other things that you can do with motifs, if you notice when we were in, you know, our object details, there's this little layout feature, right? And what happens on this layout feature is, see these spacing X and Y?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is the size of the design. That's how big each one of these leaves are. The layout lets me move. You can see there's 3 of them highlighted, and there's all these yellow pieces on the screen, right? The layout lets me use these 3 squares to do things, like I can resize from the center. If I left-click again on it, I get to rotate them. Okay? And if I don't like that, I can undo it. And if I don't like, you know, I can still go back and undo it. You can see I'm still in the layout, right? This is going to let me move so I can space these apart. See how they're spaced apart? And, you know, it kind of lets me control how these rows are, you know, spaced. See what's happening? Let me go back in. Okay, let me go back in. For whatever reason, it just kind of wanted to select that one leaf. Okay, this one is going to let me, you know, I can do something like this. See how I'm lowering it down in between those 2? And I can create a whole different look. And I'm going to go ahead and press enter so you can see the look. See what happens? I move that and they're overlapping a little bit. And, you know, I can create a whole new look. So, you know, these are sometimes hard to see on the screen, but, you know, this is going to let me change the way this whole pattern is laid out. If I change it because my in and out points are no longer matching up, I will have jumps. See the jumps between? Because these are no longer touching. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so, but that's what the layout feature does. Now, if you don't like anything, you can always go and you can undo, and it kind of takes you back through these steps. And the reason I have jumps is very simply because of the way I spaced them. You know, I need these to be touching here. Even if I move this down, all right, you can take me out of that screen now. All right, I might have to close that design because I went back too far, I think, and it just didn't handle that well. Unless we just go back. No, there we go. Okay, we just went back out of it. So, you know, when you move these around, just bear in mind, you know, like I can take these rows and I can, you know, alter them, like basically put the leaves in between and pull them down and space that closer together. But you're going to want to be careful to keep the rows touching each other here. So now that's on the motifs as a fill. On a line, the motifs behave really very much like lettering. Okay, so I've got these motifs, and, you know, if I go up to my reshape tool, I get these little diamonds. And, you know, this is the little blue node is going to let me, you know, reshape the line I made. You know, if I make it larger like I did here, it's going to add more motifs. If I make it smaller, it's going to take the motifs away. Okay, now, if I do something like this, it could be that the motifs are spaced well, but I've got a little jump. You know, I would either have to accept the jump or come up here and click on one of these diamonds and see how it highlights purple. And then I get these arrows. You know, there's another little triangle. And the main diamond lets me move this closer. It's like spacing with lettering, or further away. This arrow is going to let me adjust. You can see it's adjusting the size, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this arrow is going to let me disproportionately adjust the size. You can see I can make it really a skinny leaf, right? This one, yeah, it's the same thing. It's going to let me squish it, you know, disproportionately. You can see I've got this little, you know, feed right here is the best word for it, and that lets me rotate this. So, you know, I can kind of resize this. I can rotate it around. Let me turn off the hoop so you can see it. And, you know, and then this one's going to let me skew it. That's the best word to describe that. Little diamond is going to let me skew something. And, you know, and these controls are going to show up for each one. See, here's my little rotate point, right? Here's my little skewing diamond. You know, here's my resize proportionally. And then, of course, the resize disproportionately items. And, you know, so you can do quite a bit with a motif. You can, you know, really make these leaves or the daisy or, you know, whatever you want to use. You can really kind of change it around a little bit and give a line a really neat effect. You guys have any questions on that?
No. Mm-mm.
Okay, now, when this really comes in handy, let me turn the hoop back on and get rid of this, is when I have something that, you know, I need to fit into a specific area and maybe something's a little bit larger than what it needs to be. Or, you know, maybe something's overlapping just because of the shape.
Bernie,
Uh-huh.
did you know that your sound was off just a little bit ago?
My sound went off again?
Yeah, and it looked like your screen was frozen.
Huh.
When you had the leaves up.
Oh, when I had the leaves up. You know, the program kind of froze for a second when I, you know, was in the motif. So I wonder if it just, if it went blank on your side but didn't go blank on mine.
Well, it didn't go blank, but it just kind of froze.
Okay.
And then you started talking about this.
Oh, okay. Oh, the leaves on the, when I was on the line is what you're talking about. Okay. Okay, so here's a line, and, you know, I'm going to go pick a motif, and one that I know is, you know, just really going to drive you crazy. Whoops, first I have to select the line. Do you ever have, I'm going to blame that on you, Shirley. How's that?
Oh, okay, go ahead.
All right, so I'm going to go in here, and, I know that if I select this one, that it's not going to do what I want it to do because, this is an odd shape. So I'm going to go ahead and select that one and say, okay. And that actually did pretty good. So, however, when I really look at this, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. If I had to fit this into a specific area, you can see I've got some issues here, right?
Mm-hmm.
I could do a couple of things. Here's my line. I could adjust the line if I wanted to, but, why not just take the motif and, I could move it closer together, but, I could see this little yellow dot. That's actually the shape of the line. So I could actually move the line if I needed to. But, why not just take this and just shrink it that little bit that I need for it to fit somewhere? Just that little bit, right? Or rotate it a little bit to get it to fit into where I need it to go. If it's something like this and it's a minor deal and you just need it to, change just a little tiny bit, then there really isn't a problem with resizing this or rotating a little bit. Nobody is going to notice this slight change, right? Nobody's going to notice that it's slightly smaller, or that it's, not quite as tall. Nobody is going to see that, from far away or from even up close. It's not that drastic. So that's one of those tools. I'm sorry?
You're just working on that one, right?
Right, just this one right here.
Okay.
And you can see if I go, out to 100%, right? Do you really notice that that one's a different size?
No.
And, so if you need to make those little changes, or, like maybe you want to move these around in here, right? Nobody's going to notice if one of these is a little bit larger, to fit into the space you need to fit it into. So that's when these little controls come in handy for a motif. Okay. And you can see I've got a little overlap here. I would just use these to space them out. And you can actually hold the control key, and you can see I've got, like some overlapping in here, right? You can hold the control key to select multiple nodes and move them at one time. See? So if you have to really space something out, like, picture this around the hem of a little girl's, pinafore, or a little hemline, right? Like a little scalloped hemline. Mm-hmm. It'd be kind of a fun little trim, but you'd have to make some adjustments like this one. You probably would want to pivot that if you could. And sometimes you have to really look for that pivot point. Or you might want to pivot this one. To get it to line up a little bit better. Or maybe even resize it just a little bit, right? You have those options. So, all right, let me zoom back out to 101. All right, so that makes sense on all the motifs, right?
Yes.
Okay, and we did go through on how to make our own motif, but what we're going to do the next time is we're going to go through, and I want you to get very, very comfortable with the motifs and start playing with the motifs, and we're going to start making some of our own borders. And, we're going to make the little pieces, and then we're going to make a decorative border, that we can actually use on something. We'll talk about how to create alignment marks as well. And, my line of thought on creating the border is it's easier to do a straight border to start with. Like, you wouldn't want to try to do something around the color of a shirt first. You're going to want to do something around the hem first. But, we're going to use this. And which machines do you guys have, just out of curiosity?
I have the Elna Exquisite 2.
Okay.
I just bought the Janome 1500 or 1500.
Oh, I'm so jealous. I'm
Well,
jealous.
Me too.
Okay, so you've got a big hoop, but even you can benefit from making aligning marks, especially if you're doing like a hem around a skirt.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're gonna, play with how to make the aligning marks, and it won't matter what size hoop you have, but you have the exquisite. So you actually could do, you could use your multiple hoop option on the machine, but you should still have a lining mark. So then you know that if you have to move something, you can. So that's what we're going to work on the next time. So I want you to play with the motifs,
Okay.
and I want you to play with these tools. Even if you just take a circle, find out what these are, like, what you want to look for. So if I go in here and I say, oh, let's make this a stipple fill, play with this and find out what its limits are, right? Like, I don't want to make a stipple with a stitch that small, right? That would be just a nightmare to stitch. Somewhere between 2.5 and 2.8 is pretty good, right? That's my, stitch length. My minimum length is 0.8. You might want to beef that up a little bit. But, you have to know what happens. And on this, so you have to kind of drag it. So you have to kind of know what this is going to do. What's the limit of each fill? Like if I beef this up to 1, which is still very small, by the way, there's my run count, 1, right? My looping spacing, what does that do? What if I put that at 5? What happens, right? My cord gap, what the heck is that? If I put this at 0.25, what's it going to do? Okay, if I put this at, 5 or 1 or 2, what's going to happen here? What does this do? Okay, this inset steps, kind of controls the spacing around the area. Like for this, see how I made this circle? This inset steps at 1. If I say okay, I guess it would help if I actually selected it. I keep forgetting that. And there's the last, settings that I used, right? I'm going to see if I can decrease that cord gap a little bit. Let's see what happens. You can see it on the screen. See what's happening? That stitch length's getting smaller too. So I would want to keep that probably about 1.5, right? But, play with these and watch what happens on these little previews. Like, there's what the stippling stitch looks like. You have to know that if you make this, look at what happened to it when it's that size, right? It's not very pretty, but if I use it in a larger setting, it's probably a little bit nicer looking, right? But because my stitch length was at, my minimum stitch length is at 1, I don't maybe have it as curvy as I want it. So, you have to kind of play with these things. Even if you use a circle, go in and look at, the I guess the best way to describe it is the limitations of the stitch. Like this looks kind of cool, but if you zoomed in, how thick would this be here? Look, it's not, why is it not meeting there? What happens if I stitch that circle? Because what's on your screen isn't always what actually happens on your machine. So play with the fills and play with the controls and the motifs so that, you're a little more comfortable and, more likely to recognize a problem before you take your, motif that we're going to make next week. The motif combination is what it's actually going to be to your machine. Okay?
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, ladies, no questions?
No.
Other than I don't think my 3 grandsons would care for it.
Your 3 grandsons